Femininity by Susan Brownmiller. Chapter 6, Movement. Athene, goddess of wisdom and goddess of war, protector of cities and patron inventor of the technological arts, also invented a remarkable flute. Pleased with her accomplishment and its beautiful music, she played one day at an Olympian banquet, expecting a generous round of applause. Instead, she noticed Hera and Aphrodite laughing behind their hands. Repairing in confusion to a stream in the woods, Athene picked up the flute and watched her reflection in the water. Suddenly she understood. In the strain of transforming her breath into music, her cheeks puffed out comically. Her features were distorted. Athene threw away her fine invention with a curse. According to scholars of classical Greek, this story comes late in the cycle of the myths. My mother gave me curtsy lessons before I was 5. At the drop of a cue, quote unquote, and this is our daughter Susan, I'd gather the ends of my short pleated skirts, elbows in, wrists down, fingers up, and fall to the ground on one tender-skinned knee. Grown-ups were enchanted. So was I, for Shirley Temple, Deanna Durbin, and all of the storybook princesses stood at my side. I had mastered my first serious training in feminine movement, and found it was something at which I excelled. I always excelled in feminine movement. I'm lissom, I'm fluid, even in trousers. Want to see me raise my eyebrow? I used to practice for hours in front of a mirror. Notice how I roll my eyes when I say something clever and crinkle my nose when I laugh? Teen queen flirtation, consciously applied. The slight tilt to my chin, copied from Paula E. The most popular girl in grade school, the arch of my neck, the curved alignment of my raised arm and hand, poses I learned from ballet, my fluttery wave goodbye, an adaptation of Queen Elizabeth in a motorcade. I never jab a finger. Mother always said, quote unquote, don't point, and I still relax on the sofa in a kittenish curl. Inspired by classical sculpture, Chinese ivories, and Florentine art, I'm an adept practitioner of the oblique gesture, the softened motion, the twisting torso, the widening eyes. I rarely stand straight, preferring to lean sideways from the waist, with one knee slightly flexed, one hip extended. I lower my shoulder when I lift my arm, adjusting the balance of elbow, wrist, and fingers, breaking the line at each critical point. Without conscious effort, I smoke a cigarette, eat a sandwich, regard my hand, climb into a taxi with full assurance of the feminine effect. I've been doing it for a lifetime. I never forget. Or do I? What about when I hurry through a crowded street, when I lose myself in a heated discussion, when I make a wisecrack that is aggressively cutting? Hunched shoulders, clenched jaw, narrowing eyes, and head thrust forward like a lowering bull. Torso rigid, neck strained, thumb jerking strongly. Nothing is feminine about these postures. Where did they come from? I shrink from the knowledge that my reliably trained body can slip so easily over the line, and I remind myself to watch it. Even the best of actresses can let her performance slide, and I perform now without props and from memory. What a stroke of good fortune that my basic equipment is right for the part. What anatomical dumb luck, when a happy accident of genetics, that my physical characteristics fall within the idealized norm. Suppose my shoulders were broader, or my fingers were stubby. Suppose my joints weren't supple, and I didn't possess a limber, flexible spine. What if I weren't small-framed and light-boned? What if my reflexes were sluggish, my coordination a bit slow? Suppose I was big-framed, hefty, and stiff throughout the middle. The answer must be acknowledged. I doubt that I would have gotten away with being me. My disinterest in children, my dislike of makeup and jewelry, my inability to cook a good meal or embroider a pillow, what a terrible record of unfeminine traits to pile on top of strong ambition. If I hadn't felt secure in the way that I move, something else would have had to give. For in truth, I could not have pushed forward in life without some signal of the feminine standard to claim as my own. I am too competitive and eager to please. Biological femaleness never left me in any doubt as to which sex I belonged to, and I've always been pleased with the luck of the draw, but gender alone does not suffice to convince the judgmental. One must demonstrate that one glories in being a woman, or suffer suspicion. In the in the illusory, demanding art of the feminine, I've let my physical gestures prove my credentials. And now for the hard part. The 4-year-old who practiced her curtsy, wore an opal ring on her finger, and walked with her small fists tucked firmly in a little fur muff, wanted to be the best little girl in the world. Being best, she discovered, was relative and complex. The spirited 12-year-old was elected captain of the girls' punchball team, but her pleasure at socking the ball out of the schoolyard was tempered by her worry that she might develop muscles. The teenage romantic, stuck on boys, gave up on sports, bought a baton to practice twirling. She hoped to become a drum majorette, performing at halftime. She devoured the etiquette columns in 17 magazine. She waited for her dates to open the door for her and walk on the curbside when they went to the movies. Her dates, alas, were not up on the etiquette columns. There were bumps and confusions, not the stately minuet of manners of which she had dreamed. She found that stepping to one side while her date bought the movie tickets was humiliating. She toyed with her hair and studied the movie posters, but that didn't help. Complications soon multiplied in fast order. She who could execute an arabesque with grace was incapable of taking her partner's lead in a foxtrot or lindy. Mother's curtsy lessons and the ring and the muff had not thoroughly prepared her for following a boy. She had learned only half the required courses, and she resented the other half, although she didn't know why. She liked being touched, but she didn't like being handled. Thus began her difficult time of testy resistance, when the boys at the dance would say, "Relax," which was guaranteed to make her nervous. She gloried in her feminine movements in solo performance, but in a 1-2-3 dip, she had 2 left feet and felt diminished. Quote unquote, and mind you, the shanty woman told Huckleberry Finn, on the lamb and dressed in a calico frock, quote, "When a girl tries to catch anything in her lap, she throws her knees apart. She don't clap them together, the way you did when you catch that lump of lead," end quote. The shanty woman had been through Huck's disguise, and was trying to give him some helpful pointers. He didn't know the first thing about threading a needle. He tossed a lump of lead sidearm, like a boy, when he could have thrown it overhead on tiptoe, and he had beamed the rat squarely instead of missing his target by 6 or 7 feet. But Huck's worst mistake had come when she dropped the lead in his lap. To convincingly imitate a girl, Huck should have spread out his skirt to receive it. This is a famous scene in Mark Twain's great novel, remembered by those who read it when they were young as a vivid explanation of the differences between girls and boys. The scene has nagged at the mind of 35 years. Mark Twain got it wrong. Girls, surely, learn to thread a proper needle at home or at school. I had. As boys are taught to throw sidearm. I've heard more than one anxious father yell at his son not to quote-unquote throw like a girl. But no girl, no matter what she was wearing, would deny such a basic reflex action as clamping her legs together when a lump of lead was dropped into her lap. Throw the knees apart? Not likely, not for any human being. Physiology can be compromised only so far. When the imaginative choreographer Tommy Toon taught a cast of actresses how to walk and sit like men, he told them to imagine they had something dangling between their legs. This adjustment, along with a suit and some direct, forceful gestures, was all the actresses needed. No mysterious bundle of tricks is required to impersonate a man, for masculine movement flows naturally from physiology with little modification. Female impersonation, however, relies on a suitcase full of special effects, a wig, a dress, a brassiere, and a set of falsies, jewelry for the arms, neck, and ears, a makeup kit with lipstick, rouge, eyeshadow, and false lashes, a girdle, nylons, and a pair of high heels. Not only must the impersonator deck himself out in full regalia to create his illusion, he must feminize himself with the workings of each and every item, for women are all female impersonators to some degree. See him on stage. He flups up his wig with a hand that is ringed and manicured with false nails. Body pitched forward on wobbly heels, his rear end juts upward as he minces to and fro. Deciding to sit, he perches one hip on a stool in a dainty maneuver. Smoothing the folds of his gown, he crosses his shaved, stockinged legs and twirls one ankle. Resting elbow in palm, he shakes a wrist to jangle his bracelets. Absently, he fondles the pearls at his neck, then touches an eyelash with one polished nail to free a bit of mascara stuck to his lid. Feather boas, fur wraps, diaphanous shawls work nicely for him. The elbow rotation required to drape them protectively across the chest induces a winsome motion. A professional calls this, quote, working with the pieces, end quote, and the art demands that he practice with each separate piece. I am entranced when I watch a female impersonator at work, particularly one who wears street clothes and is attempting to pass. Sometimes the effect is uncanny. The head turns with piquance. The fingers are never splayed, the wrist is never held rigid. The penis, I know, has been strapped back with care, or surgically removed. The breasts are augmented by hormones and silicone or padding, and all telltale signs of male hair have been thoroughly denuded. It wouldn't do for a drag queen to feel for his 5 o'clock shadow. But no matter how good the act, and sometimes it's a very, very good act, it is easy to notice a foot that is improbably large, a calf muscle that is oddly sinewy and hard, a set of shoulders that are impossibly broad, buttocks that are too high and flat, and biceps that are too thickly developed. Whenever a female impersonator does something awkward, incontrovertible biology usually gives him away. Men who imitate women are generally too big and muscular for the part, and they begin to practice too late in life. Their gestures have an exaggerated, overly energetic, overly calculated look. But then, many observers are willing to accept a few tokens, a flash of some familiar signal. Author James Morris, who took the hormonal surgical voyage to a more peaceful state of mind called Jan, has written, quote, I soon discovered that only the smallest display of overt femininity, a touch of makeup, a couple of bracelets, was enough to tip me over the social line and establish me as female. The more I was treated as a woman, the more woman I became. If I was assumed to be incompetent at reversing cars or opening bottles, oddly incompetent I found myself becoming. End quote. Women do move in ways that are different from men. The anatomical difference lends to routine activities such as walking a marked ambience that we identify as gender specific, for size and shape have a profound effect on objects in motion. A 100-pound woman who is 5'2", with large breasts, short legs, a wide pelvis, and a low center of gravity, will hurry across the street with a natural gait that is quite unlike the stride of a 200-pound man who is 6 feet tall with long legs, large biceps, wide shoulders, and a high center of gravity. But this, of course, is an exaggerated example. Physical difference between the sexes is usually less extreme. When it comes to bones, a female skeleton is lighter and thinner than a male skeleton of the same age and height. Fleshing out the bony frame, an average woman is 25% fat, 23% muscle. An average man is 15% fat and 40% muscle. This is a hormonal difference. Centimeter for square centimeter of muscle, a woman might be as strong as a man, but this seems to be a moot point. Taller and heavier in absolute weight, in muscle weight, and in bone weight, and carrying less fat, which is dead weight in terms of strength and motion, adult men usually have 1/3 more physical power than adult women. Most of this extra power resides in the upper body. With a rigorous training program, a female athlete's leg strength can equal the strength of a male athlete's leg, with adjustments for size and weight, but her arms, chest, and back muscle will remain comparatively weak. Legs perform the same function in men and women, but a woman has functional breasts with the capacity to nurse, and musculature in her upper body takes second place to the capacity for lactation. There may be cultures still extant, in which a woman serves as beast of burden while her man sits under a tree and takes his repose. But in terms of biological efficiency, it is the male of the species who is usually best suited for lifting and carrying the heavy load. With one exception. To successfully hold a growing fetus in place and to force it down and out at birth, the uterus possesses a powerful set of muscles. This grand, intricate muscle mass that expands in pregnancy and contracts with giant heaves during labor is of no use in athletic competitions or in measuring the comparative strength of women and men. But labor is what the uterus does. The bone-wearying work of pushing and bearing down until exhaustion, even though it may be called upon infrequently or not at all. A related aspect of femaleness is a large, bony pelvis that must accommodate safe passage of a baby from uterus to birth. A female pelvis is shaped like a bucket, with similar structural functions, supporting the upper body, housing the abdomen, and securing the hip bones, but without room for a birthing canal. The narrower pelvis of the male resembles a funnel. In consequence, a female's hip bones are set at a relatively greater distance, and the angle of the socket allows for a wider range of motion. A woman can execute a split with greater physical ease, but when walking or running, she must shift a bit farther to keep her center of gravity over the weight-bearing foot. This contributes to the slight roll and sway that sometimes distinguishes the female walk. Limberness and supple gestures are also characteristics of this female anatomy in motion. Compared to men, women usually are more flexible throughout the spine, in the hamstrings that control the knee, and in the joints of the elbow and fingers. Looseness in these specific joints is probably an estrogenic effect. Small, light bones and agile fingers give the female a greater aptitude for fine motor coordination of the hand. This is useful, interestingly enough, in traditional women's work, such as weaving, sewing, knitting, quilting, and crocheting, in making pottery, nets and baskets, and in hand painting miniatures and china plates. In the division of labor by sex in early hunting and gathering clans, nimble fingers were a female's asset in harvesting roots, seeds, and fruit. In the permanent settlements that later evolved, deft flying fingers could help in sowing, planting, and weeding, but not in clearing the land and breaking the soil, where muscle strength in the hands, arms, and back is required. Adroit small motions are useful in routine office procedures such as filing, sorting, and typing, and in the assembly of small parts and microscopic chips on a production line, jobs that are considered women's work. Similar skills are an advantage in film editing, a craft that is popular with women in Europe, though not in North America, where union discrimination has been rank. The advantage should hold for playing the piano, especially if the keys were narrower to better suit the female span, and the woodwinds and strings. Musical instruments are passionately approved of for young ladies in the drawing rooms, but not on the concert stage. The sole exception has been the harp, for which graceful plucking gestures are a visual component of pleasure, as they are for the Japanese semisan and the ancient Greek lyre, also favored for beautiful young women. Rapid finger motions and graceful coordination are helpful in the varied, extracting chores of the kitchen. Shelling, plucking, fine slicing and chopping, stirring, whipping, and kneading bread, and decorating cakes and cookies have been traditional feminine pursuits in the home, but not, however, in the restaurant. And finally, skillful, fast, light fingers should put many women with diagnostic acumen at the top of the field in neurosurgery, and in all kinds of surgery for that matter, where the accolade of quote unquote golden hands stands for deftness at cutting and stitching, aptitudes required for dressmaking as well. Grace has subtly entered the discussion, since grace may be defined as an aesthetic value that we place on fluid, coordinated motion. The female hand makes a poor fighting fist because of small light bones and limited strength, but it lends itself well to supple articulation. Fingers that flew over a piece of embroidery sent the philosopher Rousseau into rapturous praise for the graceful feminine gesture. It was he who suggested that a dutiful daughter be trained in needlework to best display her pretty hand. Finger dexterity is probably the basis for the famous or infamous arched pinky gesture when holding a cup of tea that was once considered genteel when women did it, and so effeminate and unseemly when practiced by a man. A feminine hand is chiefly admired these days not for its skill at embroidery, or its grace at the typewriter, or for its heroic service in the kitchen, or even for its gentle touch on another's body, but rather for its manicure, the artful shaping of fingernails, and the daily creaming of banish no, sorry, to banish roughness that creates a look and feel so different from the strong, blunt hand of a man, or the work-worn hand that signals a woman's unprivileged station. Dexterous fingers are relied on to perform routine functional acts like diapering a baby, grasping a suitcase, dialing a telephone, or typing a letter with the self imposed handicap of nails that are grown to excessive length. Hollywood's contribution in the late 1930s to the concepts of seductive glamour, with antecedents among Balinese dancers and Chinese mandarins, a set of protruding enameled nails transforms the simplest gesture into the contrived, self conscious, or in some cases the impossible, or the to be avoided at all costs. Seeking an explanation for their renewed popularity in the 80s, David Kunzel, author of Fashion and Fetishism, suggests that the restrictions on manual dexterity imposed by long nails are comparable in their erotic appeal to the narcissistic transformation of feminine motion imposed by a corset and high heels. This is not necessarily what women think, for women are notoriously unaware of how their feminizing effects may be perceived. No woman seriously entertains the idea that her lipstick reddened mouth is a provocative symbol of her vagina, as the porn magazines suggest. On men and women, the cared for hand is a sign of money, vanity, and social refinement, but modern feminine psychology goes further. Growing nails is a proud achievement, proof that a woman has triumphed over her personal shortcomings and the realistic odds. Cultivating a uniform set of 10 individual nails is a project akin to the propagation of tender seedlings. One needn't be a horticulturalist or a nail biter to understand the hazards or to seek out professional aids. The emery board, the cuticle stick, the gelatin packet, the liquid hardener, the creamer, the softener, etc. Other women manage to grow beautiful nails. Why can't you? The feminine competition of nail growing, women against herself, women against nature, and women against other women, is so absorbing that accounts of the struggle, which read like the triumph over polio, have been written by Shirley MacLaine and Helen Gurley Brown, among others. And the results are indeed a tactile sensation. Thumb against nail, nail against palm, fingers against doorbell, the merest gesture gives reassurance of the feminine difference, while a jagged, broken end is evidence of public failure and a stern imperative to begin again. Gaily enameled fingertips tap out romantic desire for a life free of drudgery and manual chores. In an extraordinary inversion of the function of hands, the improbable nails are flourished aloft as sophisticated symbols of feminine labor, for hard work, vigilance, and creative care go into the maintenance of each forefinger and pinky. Even when they are glued on fakes, fakery may not be chic, but nevertheless it is a permissible resort. The House of Revlon was built on the legend that a woman of glamour possessed long, perfect nails that never broke, chipped, or cracked. In an embarrassing repudiation of the Revlon myth, Susie Parker once lost a false nail during a presentation of the new fall colors. The buffed and manicured feminine hand is admired for its sparkling conveyance of material status, the engagement diamond that flashes a husband's financial worth, the plain gold band that signifies marriage, the trinkets and baubles that trill a love of wealth, fun, and drama. Once, kings and popes laded their fingers with jeweled rings that were kissed as symbols of absolute power. In the age of democracy, it is a woman's hand that bears the encrusted brilliance to convey the message that manual labor lies whimsically beyond its reach, while producing fingernails and jewels on men are shunned as signs of decadent effeminacy. A pliant wrist is supposedly another sign of grace in women and effeminacy in men. But laboratory tests show no difference between the sexes in ability to flex the wrist joint. Yet the limp wrist has been caricatured so often and so wickedly that it has become the defining gesture of swish and the woman. Heterosexual men seem to guard against natural wrist flexibility except when throwing a ball or swinging a racket, in the interest of preserving a forceful, dynamic, straight line masculine gesture, as evidenced in a vigorous, manly handshake, while women and gay men, in the interest of expressing emotion, practice less constraint in their gesticulations. In The Homosexual Matrix, C. A. Tripp expounded, quote, "A hand movement which may be gracefully soft when done by a woman can gain so much energy and speed when done by a man that it becomes a swish. The very word denotes the rush of air around a high-speed motion. The exaggerations of swishy effeminacy that can make it look like a caricature are the result of rounded, highly animated motions being transposed into the more muscular and aggressive repertoire of the male." End quote. In any event, biologically speaking, a floppy wrist has no gender-related basis. Authentic limberness in the female may be demonstrated in the ability to bend from the waist and touch the palms to the floor. Trunk and hip flexibility, which includes lateral motions and loose elbow joints and hamstring muscles, are an advantage in certain physical pursuits that girls traditionally have shown a preference for, and have been directed toward by their parents, such as ballet and figure skating, and more recently, gymnastics and yoga. The splits, bends, arches, twists, leg extensions, and elbow rotations that the limber female body can coax itself into with less difficulty than the male have led much of the world. Nureyev and Baryshnikov might disagree, but Balakian, I gather, would not, to consider women the more graceful of the two sexes. Beyond flexibility, there is something about a small, light body revolving through space that seems to be an aesthetic delight to the eyes. Sports journals have noted that winning gymnastics of both sexes are small for their gender. Judges are favorably disposed to slender, light frames, which the popularity of the little Kathy Rigby, Olga Korbut, and Nadia Comaneci bears out. In this brilliant essay on aesthetics, Friedrich Schiller defined masculine beauty as energetic strength and grandeur, and feminine beauty as gentle harmony and grace. Schiller did not doubt which of the sexes was, quote unquote, essentially in possession of true grace, although he railed at the artifice that was thought to enhance it. Perceiving a woman's gestures were more supple and less percussive, he wrote, quote, "Woman is a reed which bends at the gentlest breath of passion," end quote. Of course, he had no idea that the bending reed might be shot through with estrogen or that the muscular energy was related to testosterone. Consequently, he was quite poetic in his observation. Quote, "The more delicate structure of the woman receives more rapidly each impression and allows it to escape as rapidly. It requires a storm to shake a strong constitution, and when vigorous muscle begins to move, we should not find the ease which is one of the conditions of grace." End quote. The idealization of gender-related movement is romantically expressed in the pas de deux of classical ballet, where certain conventions are never broken. A ballerina does not give physical support to her partner. She does not lead him through bends, arches, and turns, or lift him in the air, and her partner does not strap himself into satin toe shoes and balance himself en pointe. A male dancer proudly exhibits his upper body strength by lifting, catching, and steadying his partner. He exhibits his graceful leg strength through the high jump and the leap. A female dancer uses her arms for balance and expressive motion. And although we know that she must have strong legs, that her calf and thigh muscles must have been arduously trained, and her feet are thick and strong and can hold a tough grip, the entire force of her body musculature is directed toward an illusion of exquisite, unearthly fragility as she raises herself on her toes. A ballerina must not be overly tall, or else she might tower over her male counterpart on point. Her breasts and hips cannot be large, for this would spoil the sylph-like illusion. Her feet should not have thin, elegant, pointed toes, however, even though such toes conform to the delicate body preferred for a dance. Delicate toes would cause a dancer unbearable pain when compressed and jammed against the hardened, squared tip of her toe shoe, and a fine, thin foot is no good for gripping and balance. A thick, stubby hoof is best for a ballerina, not a thin, slender pedestal. Mindful of the feminine contradiction, the great Pavlova insisted that for photographs, her feet be pared down to ethereal points by a skilled retoucher. So did Maria Taglioni, Pavlova's idol, who invented the toe shoe in 1831 for her role in La Sylphide. A professional ballerina's body is not typical in any sense. Her knees must be capable of hyperextension in order to tuck away the bony kneecap when she is on point, to create a soft swan-like curve that extends to the arch of her foot. To execute the classical positions, she must have hip sockets that give her extreme natural turnout in the thighs and a characteristic duck-footed walk when she is not performing. As a rule, she should have, quote-unquote, general ligamentous laxity, combined with muscular strength, and she must be a lot thinner than in the days where Degas painted her. If she is a Balanchine dancer, she will have long legs and a short torso, in contradiction to the usual female body. Quote unquote, ballet is a woman, said Balanchine. Well, sort of. One doesn't need to have been an imperial Russian ballerina, or an imperial Chinese empress, or Greta Garbo in her size 9s, the clunker in her feminine perfection, or Susan B. Anthony in her 7.5, large for her day as gleefully reported by a hostile press, to have anguished over the natural size and shape of one's foot. The historic role of foot binding is well understood, but quote-unquote emancipated women will cram their toes into shoes that give their feet and legs an illusory delicacy and sneaky seductive charm. Like Cinderella's stepsisters, who chopped off a big toe for the prince and fit in the slipper. Don't worry, my dears, their mother said. When you are a queen, you won't have to walk. They risk calluses, corns, bunions, the deformity of hammer toes, a twisted ankle, a strained back, shortened tendons, and torn ligaments to wear high heels, for the naked foot is seen less frequently than the shod foot anyway, and physical comfort matters less than the psychological reassurance that comes from surmounting the feminine challenge. But I can walk in them, goes the refrain. Heels and stockings. As the whalebone corset once was a solemn rite of passage, in our time the teenage girl has pined and begged for her first grown up pair of high heeled shoes. To put them on and try the first few wobbly steps is to enter a new life. The forward pitch of the knees and the backward thrust of the buttocks, which startles the young initiate, magically induces a leggy, stilted, clickety clack walk, which, she will hear, is deeply provocative and a delight to behold. From this point on, whenever she puts on her heels, she will be set apart from the rest of the species, children and men who walk and run and climb with natural ease. Social critic Bernard Rodofsky has written that a woman is not regarded as seductive or sophisticated unless she surrenders her locomotive freedom to an impractical shoe. Quote, by depriving her of a secure walk, she becomes an irresistible female. The cheek shake, the breast shake, the body lumbers and hops. The jutting abdomen, the staccato tripping, it is all delightfully feminine. Every woman knows that to wear walking shoes or sensible shoes puts a damper on a man's ardor. The effect of absurdly impractical shoes is as intoxicating as a love potion. End quote. Devices to weigh down the foot or otherwise hamper the female's natural gait were known in the time of the prophet Isaiah, who heaped scorn on the daughters of Israel for wearing gold ankle chains with tinkling bells, which caused them to walk with mincing steps. Stilted shoes from the Orient became popular in the damp, flooded port of Venice in the 16th century, whereas chopines, as they were called, sometimes reached the staggering height of 20 inches. They persisted into the 17th century as the preferred footwear for ladies of leisure. Louis XIV, a very short king, popularized high heel shoes for men in his court, but the custom was short lived as men felt a greater need for mobility than for artificial elevation. In the 1920s, when women freed their bodies from corsets and dragging long skirts, the high-heeled shoe was reintroduced to fashion, partially to emphasize the newly exposed leg, but perhaps unconsciously to offer a new feminine impediment to motion. An artificial feminine walk seems to gratify many psychological and cultural needs. The female foot and leg are turned into ornamental objects, and the impractical shoe, which offers little protection against dust, rain, and snow, induces helplessness and dependence. In an interesting double message of the sort that abounds in the exacting but not quite explicitly feminine code, the extra wiggle in the hips, exaggerating a slight natural tendency, is seen as sexually flirtatious, while the smaller steps and tentative, insecure treads suggest daintiness, modesty, and refinement. Finally, the overall hobbling effect, with its sadomasochistic tinge, is suggestive of the restraining leg irons and ankle chains endured by captive animals, prisoners, and slaves who were also festooned with decorative symbols of their bondage. Those who doubt the subliminal connection between feminine style of women's footwear and the taming of captives and animals might take a close look at the fancy knee-high leather boots in their closet. Superfluous buckles and straps resemble nothing but reins and stirrups, confusing the wearer with horse and rider. It might also be instructive to take a look at some hardcore pornography where the honored place of high heels is secure. One pervasive image is the woman who is bound, gagged, and naked except for a pair of spindly black pumps. Another is the dominatrix, with whip in hand, who also teeters on 6-inch stilettos. So compelling is the imagery of the spiked heel that it serves both ends of the sadomasochistic fantasy, a symbol of immobilized dependence and a weapon that stomps and hurts. Similarly, long sharp fingernails which reduce the competence of the hand and preclude the making of a fist are transmogrified into cat-like red claws that scratch and draw blood. Hatpins are another sneaky weapon associated with feminine effects. To qualify as passably feminine, a shoe does not absolutely require a high heel. All it demands is some ingenious handicap to walking more than half a mile on a county road or a cobblestone street. A clog, which drags on the foot and offers no support in the heel, might do, very popular with the counterculture. And so would a platform sole with string ties, big in Miami and other resorts. A paper thin sole with no supportive cushion, the ballet shoe popularized for streetwear, is a perennial favorite of the teenage girl, and women of all ages feel chic and fragile in flimsy, strappy slingback sandals that are perilous on dirty urban pavements. A high heeled, backless, open toed mule, which manages to combine all the important impediments of walking, might at first glance appear to win the race for maximum feminine effect, but few women are willing to go this far. The backless mule is tainted by an unsubtle image of kimono clad whores who loll about in brothels. It fails the test of refinement and good taste. What a woman puts on her foot reflects, more than anything else, the historic division that separate the lady from the whore. Balancing these contradictory wings of desirable femininity, as men have defined their desires, a woman's shoe walks a crooked line between projection of blatant sexuality and projections of propriety and class. A too high heel and a too obvious display of playful hobbling threaten good taste by tipping the balance in favor of the whore. Seen from the other perspective, an overemphasis on practicality tips the balance in favor of the dowdy. The open-toed, high-heeled ankle strap with its sly imitation of a leg fetter, known in some quarters as the fuck me shoe, is another variation on love-slave eroticism that is a trifle too blatant for a lady's good taste. The gold ankle chain, I'm just a prisoner of love, is dismissed as cheap for similar reasons. A feminine shoe means different things to women of different classes, age, and occupation, but the unifying factors may be pared down to these. The shoe must make the foot look smaller. It must be light and flimsy in construction. It must incorporate some stylish hindrance that no man in his right mind would put up with. None of this is accidental. A feminine shoe deliberately reverses the functional reason why people initially chose to wear shoes. A feminine shoe is not supposed to serve the foot, leg, and hip in the practical work of moving quickly without trouble or pain. A feminine shoe is not designed to enable the wearer to cover ground more easily than if she were barefoot. To the contrary, a feminine shoe insistently drains a certain amount of physical energy by redirecting a woman's movements toward the task of holding her body in balance and keeping the shoe on her foot, while she avoids the pitfalls of grids on the escalator, cracks in the pavement, and sidewalk gratings and grills. A feminine shoe imposes a new problem of grace and self-consciousness on what would otherwise be a simple act of locomotion, and in this artful handicap lies its subjugation and supposed charm. Quote-unquote sensible shoes announce an unfeminine sensibility, a value system that places physical comfort above the critical mission of creatures a sex of creating a sex difference where one does not exist in nature. Sensible shoes betray a lack of concern for the aesthetic and sexual feelings of men, or a stubborn unwillingness to compromise graciously in their direction. Sensible shoes aren't fun. They hold no promise of exotic mysteries. They neither hint at incapacitation nor whisper of ineffectual weaponry. Sensible shoes aren't sexy. They betray the unexciting anatomical fact that a woman's foot follows the basic pattern of five toes and a heel, a silhouetted essential, no different from the foot of a man. Sensible shoes aren't dressy. They spoil soft, graceful lines. They contradict delicate proportions. Sensible shoes don't glitter and sparkle like bubbly champagne on New Year's Eve. They are crisply efficient, providing a firm, stable anchor, a balance, posture, a sturdy base from which to turn on the heel and quickly move on. What can a woman do if she doesn't care to wobble? Stand accused of failing to toe the mark? Get out of the obstacle race and settle for the role of little old lady in tennis shoes? Take to wearing sandals summer and winter like the wily Colette and paint her toenails bright red to point out how different from the men she really is? Like Colette, Gertrude Stein had a fondness for sandals, but unlike Colette, who was a mistress of feminine illusion even when she was confined to a wheelchair in her arthritic 80s, it probably never occurred to Stein to enamel her toes. Stein had no truck with feminine artifice. She wasn't concerned with enticing men, except to her evening salon on the Rue de Fleurs. Picasso's arresting portrait reveals a short-cropped, heavy-set woman in a shapeless skirt, seated with her knees spread apart in the most unfeminine manner. Here is an individual, the canvas announces, who does not care a fig about sexual attraction.